Well, one of the greatest problems in the early church, as we looked in the Bible, was that of false prophets. False prophets are everywhere in Scripture. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "But false prophets also arose among the people, just as there will be false prophets among you, who will secretly bring in destructive heresies, even denying the master who brought them, bringing upon themselves swift destruction." And in Matthew chapter 7, verse 15, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves." And even in the Old Testament, there was a lot of stuff about false prophets. Lamentations chapter 2, verse 14. Your prophets have seen for you false and deceptive visions. They have not exposed your iniquity to restore your fortunes, but have seen for you oracles that are false and misleading. Everywhere, 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 false prophets are everywhere. You would think that with the amount of attention it was given in the Bible to false prophets, that this were an epidemic of which we should always be on guard against. If false prophets are present in Scripture from beginning to end, then surely there must be present today as well, right? Where do we find the greatest danger of false prophets today? Before we can answer that, and before we go any further, you're probably going, this is an odd direction for Zach to be going, because this is not normally something I would preach on in this way. So, you know that you should expect that there is something going on here, and we're not really talking about claiming and blaming some random person as a false prophet. Okay? So, we're still talking about fear, and it will come into that. You should realize that I would never go in that direction, as a general rule. So, be ready. We're going to get this somewhere, so be ready for it, okay? Before we can answer the question of where false prophets show up today, we have to first take stock of what a false prophet does. A false prophet is not someone who disagrees with us. A false prophet is not someone who may just simply have a different doctrinal standing than us. A false prophet is not someone who does things that we may perceive as wrong or practice church in a manner that is different than us. None of those constitute a false prophet. A false prophet is someone who drives us away from God by proclaiming something contrary to the body and blood of Christ. Galatians, right? Someone who proclaims works over faith. I mean, there's a whole lot of things along those lines, right? A false prophet is someone who claims to speak for God, but whose message calls us to follow a way that makes us entirely devoid of salvation. In the New Testament, false prophets were those who denied, that makes no sense, who denied that Christ did not come in the flesh. That Christ was, I know, I gotta work through my typos here, so bear with me. A false prophet is someone who, in the New Testament, denied that Christ came in the flesh. They denied that Christ was either not man or that he was not God. That all flesh in creation was evil, and therefore it did not matter how he acted in the flesh. In the Old, a false prophet was someone who was a self-proclaimed prophet who was mixed in both idol and temple worship and Judaism. They got it all together. They claimed to speak for God, but really they spoke for no one else other than, well, whoever they found the most favor with. In order for someone to be a false prophet, they must contradict reality and lead away from trusting in God. Okay, we're going to follow those two premises. In order for someone to be a false prophet, they must contradict a reality, a truth, and they must lead us away from trusting in God. Okay, we got that? The words they speak contradict his promises, and consistently following them would lead us away from God entirely. So, with that in mind, those two things, a false prophet is someone who contradicts a reality, a truth, and someone who always leads us away from God. Who is the greatest false prophet of today?
Say the devil.
listen carefully, the greatest and most dangerous false prophet in our world today is not a preacher from another denomination. It is not a world political figure, and it is not even another religion. The most influential false prophet today is my own worries and anxieties. What constitutes a false prophet? Someone who contradicts a reality or a truth, and someone who leads us away from God. Well, wait, those are all my fears and anxieties, aren't they? I am, this applies for all of us, I am the most dangerous false prophet to myself in this world today. Whew. The most influential false prophet in our day is our own worries and anxieties. We ourselves, when we become overwhelmed by fear, become the greatest false prophets of our day. Now think about that for a moment. It may not make sense yet. What is a worry? By definition, what is a worry? Does a worry ever have anything to do with the present moment? Or is it always looking either forwards or backwards? Worry is never concerned with the definite or present realities. It is always about the what if. A worry is a misguided prophecy. It's about predicting the future and our fear of what might happen. Worry is irrational. Sometimes something can happen the same way 1,000,000 times. But if I thought or heard of it happening another way once, or if I heard a rumor of it possibly happening once, I'll be consumed with the worry that it could happen to me. For example, is anyone here afraid of flying? Sarah, okay. Okay, Sarah, I guess, the only one afraid of flying. Alright. How many planes in the world take off and land every single day? Who knows, right? How many planes have ever crashed?
A few.
A few, yeah. I mean, we might hear about maybe 2 or 3 in a year, right?
Yeah.
Okay. To say a fear is irrational is not to discount the feeling of the fear. But a fear of flying is irrational. The feeling is not irrational, but the actual worry in and of itself does not make sense. It doesn't stand up against the truth of the matter. Fears are very, very rarely things that we can just flip a switch and say, okay, we're over with. Worry will always be present. And I will choose to trust in my fear or in something else. Will I choose to trust in my fear or in something else? That is the issue at hand. We can't get rid of worry, we can't get rid of fear. What we can do is choose what we're going to trust in. So even though my fear of flying is irrational, that's not a feeling I can just get rid of. But I can choose to either trust that feeling or to trust something else. One thing we'll note about anxiety is that it is virtually always worse than the actual event itself. How many times do our fears, our worst fears, ever come to fruition? I mean, for some of us, they might have never come to fruition in the way that we feared they would. Because we always fear for the absolute worst. They are almost always worse than the actual event itself. It creates fear long before the event actually ever occurs. Anxiety and worry, they say, I think I will be in danger. And so we live in fear as if we are currently living in the moment of danger, even though we haven't even gotten there yet. Imagine it, okay? If you're afraid of flying, how long does that fear last? Does that fear last only when you're on the plane? No. If you buy a ticket 3 months in advance, you're afraid for 3 months, right? Afraid of what? Nothing's going to happen today because you're not getting on the plane today. The fear and worry is always worse than the actual event itself. Worry takes a fear that is alive in the moment and it extends it for hours, days, weeks, or even years before the moment ever actually occurs. Imagine the worst moment you've ever experienced. How long did the moment last? How long has your worry about it happening again caused that moment to last? Worry allows the fear of one moment to be alive and well for great amounts of time. Worry increases pain. And in fact, it gives pain where we might never actually experience pain in the first place. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 22, it says, "A false prophet is defined as anyone who speaks a word of prophecy and it does not come to pass." A false prophet is anyone who speaks a word of prophecy, says, "This will happen," and it does not come to pass. Err once, and you are deemed a false prophet. How many times have our worries erred? Too many times to count. Ask yourself, how have your worries proven to be false prophets? Or have they stood the test of time every single time? We tend to treat our worries completely the other way around. They fail 1,000 times, but if our worries come to fruition even once, we feel that our worries are justified. We feel that for some reason they're legitimate. And I gotta trust the next worry, even though it'll be 999 times till it proves true again. Edward Welch in his book Running Scared gives us this example. Worry that someone you love will be in a car accident. And worry about that every day, every hour for a decade. And someday, you might get a call from a friend who needs a ride because her car battery went dead. This one event that you worried about for years, decade, whoever knows, this one event will justify every single worry you ever had. Or let's say that there actually was a car accident, and your worries began there. Now, you're scared to drive. And you worry when anyone you love goes faster than 25 miles per hour. Worry has become your talisman to ward off future catastrophe. Worry is about control, as is all false prophecy. Control demands that I trust in myself and I trust in my worries. Because somehow I know better. If I imagine the worst, then I'll be prepared for it. But how many times has our worry ever actually prepared us for anything? Does worry really prepare us for what's ahead of us? And even if somehow our worry does prepare us, how much control does that preparation actually give us? As we deal with worries, we need to realize that we cannot simply be rid of it. We can't simply say, "Be gone." Try as you might, you cannot go home today and say, "I will no longer worry." What you can do, though, is choose to no longer trust in the worries that present themselves in your life. You can choose to no longer put stock in those things. You can choose to see them as false prophecies and choose to trust something else. Remember, we said there are two things that determine a false prophet. The first is they predict a reality that always proves to be false. They contradict truth. And second is they do what? Lead us away from God. We've already got to the first part. It contradicts the reality. Worry has been proven wrong how many times? Well, worry does a whole lot more than that, doesn't it? Because in order for us to take our worries seriously, it means we must stop trusting something else, someone else. Remember, false prophecy always undermines trust in God. The way to conquer worry and anxiety, then, is always to turn back to God and choose to trust in Him. Fear and worry are always running away from something. When the answer has always been, we should be running to someone. Worry causes us to run away. Trust causes us to run towards. Worry, trust distracts us from where safety actually lies. Isn't it ironic that the goal of our worry is to keep us safe? And in reality, it's driving away from the very thing that makes us safe? It's all about control. Somehow, obeying my worries gives me some sense of control over my life. But a life that in reality we have no control over. There's only one person who is in control. And our worries tend to lead us away from the one who can actually be in control. Look at the track record for a moment. What is the last thing you worried about? Think about it. How big were your worries? How much time did you spend on those worries? How did that impact your life? How much pain did you experience because of those worries? Now think about, how did everything end? Did your worries prove true? And did they prove to be worthy of all that time and misery? Do you wish that you hadn't worried so much? Yet, when it comes around again, when the next worry prepares itself, we're probably going to end up trusting that worry just as much as we did the last one. Just as much as we did that last one, which proved to be false, and, well, the worry was the worst part of the whole thing. We need to step up and we need to cry foul. We need to say, something is not right here. You are wrong again. So why would I ever trust in you again? We need to look at our worries and anxiety and we need to cry out, false prophet. You have proven yourself wrong too many times. Now think about God. How good is His record? Has He failed? Even once? Think about the story of the Exodus from Egypt. God's people are trapped. They're enslaved by the Egyptians. God walks into the story, frees the people of Israel, even parts of the Red Sea so that they might cross. Now they're wandering in the desert on the other side. What is the first thing you need when you're walking through the desert? Water. You need water, right? Basic need. We need water. Exodus 15, 24 and 25, it reads, "And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, 'What shall we drink?' And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet." Well, God is one for one. But it's not enough to alleviate our worries yet, right? Okay. My worries might have been one for one at one point in time. What else do you need in the desert? You've got water. Food. Yes, we need food. The people, once again, what do? They complain. Moses goes to God with their complaints. Exodus 16, 13 through 15 reads, "And the evening quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. When the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, 'What is it?' For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, 'It is the bread of the Lord. He has given you to eat.'" 2 for 2. But still, it might not happen for me, right? Exodus 17, they get thirsty and what does God do? Provides water again. A little later, in Exodus 17, they're attacked by Amalek, and God gives them victory. They run out of water a third time, and again, God provides. They're constantly running into opposition, and God is constantly providing victory. 3 for 3, 4 for 4, 5 for 5. Okay. We can keep counting on and on and on and on. So, how far? So far. How has God matched up against your worries? Do your worries even make the playoffs? Not even close, right? I mean, they would... No, I won't say that. My worries are probably about one success in 40 this week. But you know, even in the midst of my one successful worry, God still did a pretty decent job of providing. Don't you think we're beginning to look a little bit like Chicken Little here? The sky is falling, the sky is falling. Well, sure, it might fall. I mean, one day. We're not talking about odds. There is a sure thing, and then there is a long shot, a negligible chance. This is the difference between going to work in order to get a paycheck or choosing to sit at home and buy lottery tickets waiting to get paid. Okay. We see the difference there between our worries and trusting God. Which one do we going to trust in? We can either sit at home and keep buying lottery tickets and hope, well, one day I'm going to win the lottery and then I'll be all right. Or we can go to work every day and earn a paycheck. You might win the lottery, but yeah, probably not. Actually, I'm going to tell you, nobody in this room is going to win the lottery, and you know what? I'm probably going to be right. No, I am going to be right. Okay. But I can also tell you that if we place our trust in God, every single person in this room, God will always be there. Again, God does not promise to take away the hard times, but He does promise that in the midst of them, where will He be? Right with us. God did put in a song, right? In Isaiah 43. The high waters, what happens? Suddenly go, oh, there's some low waters then. No, it says, I will be with you, right? Even though you heard about that one person in that one place at that one time that it happened to, it's entirely not worth occupying your time with it. God is a sure thing. And He proves to be faithful in every moment of every day. When I step back and I dissect my life, we talked about this last week, didn't we? How many times has God provided, and in how many ways? I can't believe it. All right? I mean, we're going like 1,000 for 1,000. Well, no, we're better than that, right? Okay, but we're still standing at 100%. In so many of those ways, we were right down to the wire the very last second. In the final moment, suddenly, there He is. I can't find in my life even one place where God has failed me. My worries, though. My worries, man, they're failing me every moment of every day. I mean, if I think about this long enough, I probably got a worry that I'm thinking about right now. And I got to go, oh, yes, that's going to fail me today, too. If God is always there, and God has never failed, then why would I trust in my worries? Which would you choose to give credence to? The only way that we can fall is if we choose to not trust in the right one. It's not that God has failed to provide, it's that we have failed to trust in His providence. It is to our detriment to not trust a sure thing. We will experience worries every single day. Probably a great many of them. Here are some things that we know about our worries. Almost every single one of them will be false. Almost all of them are going to be exaggerated. And they will not nearly be as bad as the event itself. Not a single one of them has the ability of giving us greater control or ability to cope with it. And every single one of them will elongate the moment and bring more pain and misery than the actual event itself. We can't go home and simply be done with worry. But we can go home and decide to trust in someone bigger than our worries. God is always in control. He is always present, and He will always provide if we choose to trust in Him above our worries and fears. If we wish to have peace and live profitable, fulfilling lives, then we need to stop taking bad advice. We must quit listening to false prophets. We must choose to trust the God that never fails instead of the worries that drag us down. Leave you with the words of Jesus in John chapter 14, verse 27. It says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, nor let them be afraid."